Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Metabolism and Menopause podcast. My name is Stephanie, and I'm your host and CEO of Vitality OET. We are a women's nutrition, health, and fitness company that focuses predominantly on women's hormones, particularly as they start going through perimenopause and onwards. We know that you start experiencing so many changes in this time of your life, whether it be hot flashes, night sweats, irritability, brain fog, or of course, weight gain around the middle that seems to have come out of absolutely nowhere. So you go back to your tried and true methods of cutting calories, cutting carbs, doing a bunch of cardio, yet nothing seems to be working. And in fact, the scale might start going in the other direction and you just keep feeling worse and worse and worse. But we know now that your body is inherently different than what it was prior to you having these hormonal changes. So our mission here at Vitality is to help you really understand what happens during this time of your life so you can reach those health and fitness goals, live a life full of vitality, finally feel in control and at home in your body again, and really understand how to take care of this new body of yours. So today I have the wonderful Coach Kirianna on the podcast with me again, and we are going to be tackling the topic of, do your genetics affect your experience with menopause fat loss? Because this is something we hear a lot about, or people ask us a lot of questions about specific things. And when we think about our genes, we think about the things we got from our parents, like, our eye color or our hair color. Well, our genes are not only going to determine our permanent traits, but some of them can actually be turned off or on throughout our lives, playing a huge role in our metabolism, fat loss, energy levels, and overall health in menopause. So today we're going to really try and cover the differences between genetics and epigenetics, how they play a role in our health journeys, and can we actually change them? We're also going to discuss some of the most common genetic disorders that women typically ask us about or that we see in our program, and how that influences our internal health, especially through the menopause transition. As always, when we do a more science-y type episode for you guys, we want to start with some of the basics so that we're all on the same page moving forward, that you're not super overwhelmed. I want you to really be able to understand this. So first of all, I want to cover quickly and go over what our genetics actually mean when it comes to how our body functions. So genes are sections of DNA that have codes for the body to make specific proteins in specific sizes that have different jobs in our body. These proteins that are made from the gene instructions form the basic physical and functional units and characteristics of what makes you, you. This will range from not only your physical traits, but also how your body functions on the inside. So remember, you will inherit half of your genes, or quote unquote, the instructions that you get from each parent to create your unique genetic code. So from your hair and eye color, your dominant hand, and even if you think cilantro tastes like soap or not, genes are the instruction manual for these traits. So think of it like building furniture. You buy it, it comes in a box, it's unassembled, and it comes with an instruction manual, which is like your genes that tell you how to put that furniture together. Once that furniture is put together correctly, then it serves a specific purpose in your home. Like for us, we just got a crib and Taylor did all of the building for it. So I came home from a trip and the baby crib was in the room. So I'm very excited.
Good job, Taylor.
I know it was a great thing to come home to, but that's kind of what this kind of looks like. So we have an estimated 20 to 25,000 genes each, which means we have up to 25,000 instruction manuals that could be read to assemble our internal furniture, which is a lot when you think of it. That is a lot of pieces of furniture. So now you will have at least 2 sets of genes for each trait, and this means you have 2 or more instruction manuals for the same piece of furniture to build, one from each parent. So since you don't really need 2 desks in your office, your body decides which instruction manual it's going to follow and subsequently which gene sequence it's going to use to build your trait. So some traits are more dominant, meaning you're more likely to express them. For example, if one of your parents has brown eyes and one has blue eyes, there's a larger chance that you're going to end up with brown eyes because it's a more dominant trait. Even though you still receive that instruction manual from blue eyes, your body chooses the brown ones. So while this is a very basic explanation of genetics, I hope it helps you kind of visualize how the body works, that there's a lot of different options that your body can choose from. So instruction manual A or B. And there are also specific traits that are considered extremely heritable and usually not changeable, like your eye color, typically not going to change, right? Hair color, skin tone, your blood type, your dominant hand, if you have dimples or not, the type of earlobe attachment you have, as well as specific genetic diseases like potentially Down syndrome, cystic fibrosis, muscular dystrophy, and more. So now here's where things can get a little bit tricky, as if you weren't already like, wow, that's a lot of options, right? So let's say your furniture instruction manual built you a desk for your office. One of two things could still alter the end product. So you have instruction manual A, instruction manual B, but there are different things that can alter what that desk ends up looking like. So A, you read the instruction manual wrong or lose a part during the building process, or the desk is just built improperly, right? Or you build the desk and then alter it after the fact. So for example, you can paint a desk a different color. Maybe you add a little shelf to it. So there's other things that can be added to that thing. So it's not just instruction manual A and instruction manual B. It's, do you follow the instructions? Do you lose parts during the process? Is it built properly? And then you get to that final product and you're like, I don't like it. And then you change it.
So this is where something called epigenetics comes in. Unlike genetic changes, which are permanent and irreversible, I've never met anyone that can change their eye color that they're born with permanently. Epigenetics are actually more dynamic and are often changeable if you add or remove something called inducing factors. So factors that induce these changes. So the stimulus our environment puts on our body can actually determine which genes get turned off or turned on, or which genes are maybe read incorrectly, or our environment can also influence, maybe we lose a part for building that desk, right? Basically, environmental influences we expose our body to and the choices that we make with our own behaviors can actually determine which instruction manuals are utilized and when, how the instructions are read, and if the furniture is even built or utilized correctly. So recent evidence actually suggests that epigenetics interact with the metabolic, endocrine, and immune response pathways. So consequently, alterations in metabolism can actually result in diseases, pathogenesis, such as endocrine disorders, autoimmune conditions, even a lot of different types of cancers have been linked to environmental changes that actually turn genes on and off. So here's what epigenetics, or, AKA our behaviors and our environment that influence which genes get turned off or turned on, can help determine throughout our life that are maybe applicable to us. So our height and our weight are actually very epigenetic. So our environment will help determine what we end up like, how tall we end up, how much we end up weighing throughout our life at different stages. Our metabolic rate, so how fast we burn calories, our hormonal balance, and our menopausal transition, which we're going to talk a little bit more further along here. Our energy levels too. Some people are naturally more energetic. Some people can have stressful events that happen that change their energy levels. Our mood and mental state. You probably know that a lot of mental health disorders develop as you're an adult, which is usually an epigenetic change to a stimulus in your environment. We aren't usually born with them. They usually develop afterwards, or they get turned on afterwards. Our body's ability to actually detoxify things. Our immune system health, so development of autoimmune disorders, how sick you get, how often, any kind of virus you're able to fight off, and of course, our overall state of health. So some epigenetic changes can become permanent, while others are fully reversible. And the problem with this is that since epigenetic changes come from our behaviors and environment, they can actually, even though they are reversible, they can be really difficult to reverse because your life usually is what influenced the genes to change, right? So, and we'll talk a little bit about that later too, and what we can do to start helping ourselves with these epigenetic changes from menopause. But I'll get you to start, Steph. What are some very specific behaviors or maybe environmental factors that can help us understand what play a role in these epigenetic changes of what happens to our bodies?
Yeah, so there's a lot. So we're going to cover a bunch of them here today. But first is going to be nutrition and your dieting history. And this is why every woman who comes into our program, or everyone that I ever have a conversation with, I'm always asking, how many diets have you done? How long did you do that for? What is food intake like now? How long have you been doing that for? And people are like, oh my gosh, like, why do you have to know all this stuff? Because it matters. What we eat, how much we eat or how little we eat, and the specific foods we eat all play a huge role in how our body functions and expresses itself. So for example, in menopausal clients, chronic undereating for many years can cause metabolic changes that affect how our body holds onto fat stores. Chronic overeating or eating too inconsistently, so you're up and down, low one day, eating a lot the next day, maybe you're skipping meals. That's also going to be linked to inflammatory diseases like IBD and blood sugar regulation changes, including the development of diabetes. So this is why when we hound you about these things and ask you a million questions, it's important because we're trying to understand what your body's been through, the environment that it's been in, because we always say, like, genetics will quote unquote load the gun, but your environment and all these things, these choices, behaviors, all those things are really what ends up pulling the trigger for the struggles that you start experiencing, the symptoms, things like that.
Exactly. And we have to ask a lot of questions because the longer maybe of a history you have or the more stress and trauma you have, which we'll talk about in a second too, like all of these factors will determine maybe how reversible or like how long it's probably going to take us to change these epigenetic expressions, right? Because it is a very baseline change in your body. And I'm sure women going into menopause will relate to this because they're like, yeah, my body like is not changing with all of these changes I'm trying to like fix. And it's just like not responding anymore. It's getting really, really hard. Right. Another thing that can affect epigenetic changes would be our physical activity. So under exercising or over exercising extremely without like proper nutrition or anything like that, can create much better or worse health outcomes for many people. So studies have shown that exercise can eliminate symptoms or issues associated with hormone imbalance related conditions. So for instance, PCOS, which can be hereditary, but is also epigenetic. So our environment will again pull the trigger, right? And it can also help determine how the thyroid functions. So activity levels can determine how our stress response controls other hormones in the body. Physical activity is a really important part of how your body functions in terms of vitality for the rest of your life as well. So if you're not exercising properly or you're not exercising the right way, or you're over exercising, typically that stress is going to cause epigenetic changes that are very negative for you. And muscles are an organ group that will communicate to the rest of the body. So this makes it a really integral part of healthy aging to make sure that you do have really healthy muscle groups on your body.
So the next one is physiological stress. So of course, we're going to be talking about cortisol here, you guys. Can't ever get away on a podcast without it. But physiological stress can completely change the way your body functions through stress response and cortisol levels, among other stress hormones and prohormones. So for example, I'll give the example of my mom. My mom has been or was a very healthy woman for a very long time, ate well, was active. But the amount of stress that we went through with my dad and like the abuse there and the isolation and just all these other things that were just very stressful. Like she would get blood work done, she would get things done and like everything looked good. And then all of a sudden it was like, boom, she was hit with cancer out of nowhere. And the doctor was like, honestly, it sounds like it was stress induced. I myself have PCOS, like stress induced because I didn't really have any, it doesn't run in my family. There's no other like factors that really like promoted that would be a thing aside from that stress response. So it absolutely like the stress you experience can absolutely 100% be the thing that pulls the trigger for you to start experiencing these changes. So the thing with cortisol is cortisol is a puppeteer master. I talk about this all the time. It controls everything in your body. We have a receptor for cortisol literally in every area of our body, all the organs, all the places. So what happens is cortisol, that stress hormone that gets released in a time of fight or flight, which is typically just like a short burst, right? And then it's supposed to come back down. We're living in a state where we're stressed all the time. We think we're quote unquote handling it well, but this is what's happening in our body. We're skipping meals. We're not eating enough food. We're not eating enough carbohydrates. We're go all the time. We're not sleeping. Financial stress, COVID, grief, all of the life changes that we're experiencing. And what happens is cortisol just keeps going up and up and up and up. And that's your stress hormone, right? And what happens when cortisol is high is it slows down sex hormone production, making menopause significantly more challenging. We know that hormonal imbalances are going to lead to weight loss resistance or weight gain, even in that matter, through different mechanisms. So like really low energy. If you have low energy, you're not going to want to be active. You're also probably not going to meal prep. You're going to have more cravings. The changes in hormones are going to make it so that your body is unable to control blood sugar as well, which again is going to make it very challenging to deal with cravings, to have good energy, to not see fat storage. We're going to see a direct decrease in your thyroid function, which means your metabolism slows down. So it's harder to lose weight because your body sucks at burning calories. Liver function is going to decrease, making it very hard for your body to detox things, leading to more hormonal issues. You're going to have your gut health go to crap. So you're going to start experiencing more inflammation, more bloating, more IBS type symptoms. Maybe you start developing leaky gut, food sensitivities you never had before. But then what we're doing to try and like quote unquote fix our problem of weight gain, right? Especially menopause, we're just adding more exercise. We're doing less food. We're cutting our carbs. We're go. We're sacrificing sleep to wake up super early to work out. And what we're seeing, and then we're having coffee on an empty stomach and we're fasting. All of these things keep increasing cortisol more, making that cycle more vicious. But we think that this is the way to fix it, right? By eat less, move more, go, when actually you're making the cycle much worse. So you kind of get to a point where your body is like, I can't handle it anymore. We've had too much stress, even though you think you're handling it well mentally, right? You're like, it's not as bad as it was before, or it's not as bad as Susie Q down the street. But this is what's happening in your body regardless of what you think. So we see this as being a very huge driving factor in most women, where cortisol is a thing that ends up pulling the trigger and making it very challenging. And then you have all the mental health aspects that comes with that. And it's this very big cycle where we need to stop it, but we're so conditioned to, all the diets that we've heard about and the fasting and all those things that end up making it so much worse. And you're never going to get anywhere. But it's like, that's where things just stopped working for you, is because, or things really changed, or you started having all these symptoms. It was where your body was like, and we're over. You've been teetering that line for so long, and then you finally tipped the scales over in the wrong direction.
And we cannot emphasize how important it is that, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, like what we can do, but stress management is so important. And it's always the last thing that people try, because they're like, what supplements can I take? What medications can I take? What can I do for more exercise or different exercise? Or even like, what kind of foods can I eat? And a lot of that stuff will probably not change or make big changes, because most people's biggest red flag is going to be that physiological stress response that we need to fix, right? But on that note too, Steph did mention that sleep does suffer, and poor sleep quality is also an epigenetic change that can happen. So a 2013 publication also identified shift work as a major epigenetic player. So I'm going to put that in with poor sleep quality, because it's usually your circadian rhythm, which is your sleep-wake cycle, that gets disrupted with shift work. I do see a lot of clients that are nurses or former nurses do have a lot of like epigenetic stress factors from all the shift work that they did. But low sleep quality causes chronic changes in the body and the metabolism, like muscle loss, memory, and brain function. Remember, it's all a form of stress. Associating sleep issues with the development of dementia has also recently come into lots of publications as well. If you don't sleep very well or you get very little sleep, the probability of you developing dementia in later years is very high. Thyroid health as well will suffer with poor sleep, which we know can directly affect the metabolism and can be an almost irreversible epigenetic change for your body. And the risk of developing diseases like diabetes and heart disease skyrockets when you do have poor sleep quality as well, which are all epigenetic changes.
And if you are getting better sleep, your cortisol levels will be lower.
Exactly.
We can link everything back to cortisol in every way. Every way, you guys. I don't think people realize, everyone thinks stress is just I feel stressed. It's no, there's a lot of things that you can do to stress your body. So the next one is obesity. So environment is a huge, huge factor for obesity over time. And while obesity traits can be inherited, not will, can be inherited or passed down, these epigenetic changes are largely environmental. Okay? Unfortunately, there are several studies that show that children who grow up with obese parents can have changes to their bodies their body's response to food, but the environment and habits they're raised around play a much more determining factor in those people's obesity outcomes as adults. So just because your parents were overweight, just because like your grandparents were overweight, or maybe your sibling is overweight, or your aunt is overweight, does not mean that you cannot lose the weight. Okay, this is where people are like, because of this, therefore I can't. No, paying attention to your environment is very important, but it's also going to be incredibly important for your children. So it's really important to understand these things to be able to raise like healthy families as well, right? So there are numerous studies that have shown that obesity will change your epigenetic profile. So AKA it will change the way your instructions are read and the furniture that is built, leading to gene expressions that are more likely undesirable, like leptin resistance, insulin resistance, major food cravings. However, numerous studies have also shown that lifestyle intervention can actually reverse and restore a normal genetic profile again. So just because your parents were overweight doesn't mean you're going to be overweight. And if you are overweight, doesn't mean that that's not reversible. But lifestyle intervention can reverse this. Okay, so this is important to realize that the things that we're doing here, nutrition, lifestyle, understanding the stress response, can reverse that. So don't think just because, your parents have had that and stuff like that and it runs in your family does not mean that you are doomed. Do not let that label like crush you, because we can address it and we do address it and we see it all the time.
Yeah, and we do have clients that come in that see a lot of really, really good success with lifestyle changes and modalities. Now, of course, that being said, we're not acknowledging that it's not going to be really hard for some people, because it's like how you're raised, which means that, there is some core value there, that you grow up with very specific habits that really get entrenched in like the way that your subconscious brain operates. So it's a lot of unlearning, right? The next one is also alcohol and smoking, not together, separately, or both, of course, but there's no denying that chronic use of both alcohol and or the smoking habit will cause genetic damage over time, leading to much higher chances of developing chronic diseases throughout life. So again, heart disease, chronic conditions, any kind of lung issues, even autoimmune conditions with like your respiratory system. And of course, like a very much higher chance of developing cancer. Alcohol has been linked to dementia and those mental disorders as we get older as well.
Yeah, I think this is huge. Like, we're all so freaking terrified of carbs. Like, we are so afraid that carbs are going to make us fat, that's going to make us sick. Like, I made a post about it today. Like, everyone is so terrified of bread, of pasta, of potatoes. Yet you have a cocktail a couple times a week.
Yep.
When we know that alcohol has no benefits to your health in any way, shape, or form, not even nutritionally. It just causes a lot of harm on our liver, on our hormones, increases cortisol, increases fluid retention. The scale's going to go up. There are so many things that we see that alcohol has statistically shown even to increase your cancer risk, but we can't have carbs. It's crazy. It's crazy to me. Okay, so next one is environmental pollutants or chemicals. So there are certain chemicals that are endocrine disruptors and can affect immune health and change your genetic profile by altering your DNA or the way your DNA is read, such as BPAs in plastics or atrazine or herbicides for grasses or crops, things like that. I did a whole episode on hormonal disruptors if you guys want to go check that one out, where I go over a lot of these things for you, both like environmental pollutants and chemicals and some lifestyle things as well that really disrupt hormones. So if you want more details on that, head back to that episode. I cannot remember what episode it is, but it's a little ways back, but I'm pretty sure the title is hormonal disruptors or types of hormonal disruptors.
Yeah. And we've seen this historically with, if you guys remember the whole DDT thing, where they were spraying DDT as a mosquito repellent. And then down the road, years later, they're realizing that it has such major endocrine disruption, issues on humans, on wildlife. It just destroyed a lot of ecosystems. That can happen with a lot of different chemicals and compounds. So just making sure that you are being careful about your environmental exposure, but not giving yourself so much stress because you're so paranoid about everything that it makes everything worse. Remember, don't stress out about the stuff you can't control. The next one is also medications. So like it or not, hormone therapy or some other medications can actually cause epigenetic changes in your body. So people who take HRT, or a really good example of this other than the hormone replacement therapy would be people who take long lasting or high doses of any kind of steroid medication like corticosteroids. So prednisone is probably the most common one. This will actually create lasting epigenetic changes on our adrenal response. So any kind of corticosteroid has been medically shown to cause adrenal dysfunction and adrenal insufficiency. And fat storage in areas like your face, your upper back, so like the back of your neck, and of course in your abdomen as well. So it will change the way that your body genetically stores fat and basically how your metabolism runs properly.
Yeah, and when we talk about like adrenal dysfunction and adrenal insufficiency, like that means your body like can't send the signal from your brain to your adrenals to produce the proper amount of cortisol. So it ends up being too much and then eventually being too little. And then you're left with symptoms like extreme exhaustion. You can't lose weight. You've got the brain fog. Like it's almost like your hormonal symptoms are just on like, holy crap. Like it's just very, very aggressive. And that takes a long time to come back from. So that is important to be aware, like disclose that to your coaches and stuff like that if you are on those kinds of things, or you have had a history of that where you would have been on it for a long time in your past. Things that come to mind are like lots of like cancer patients when they were younger and things like that. A lot of them get put on steroids. So that is something to be aware of. And again, talk to like your coach about it, because they should be able to like understand that and realize, okay, the recovery phase is going to take longer, which is why we need all this information when we ask all these things, because it's going to determine if you're going to be in a reverse diet longer or your maintenance longer, to make sure your body's actually at a point where things will function a bit better. The next one is viruses or infections. So getting sick can not only change your stress response, obviously, because being sick is a stress, but it can change your DNA or the way your genes are permanently read as well. So it can also cause damage to the way some genes are read, which can bring about changes in the way that your body may feel or actually function. So viruses like Epstein-Barr virus or hepatitis will cause some epigenetic damage as well. So again, these are important things to tell people like when you're working with them, because these things matter and are going to definitely influence how long of your process will be, what that journey kind of looks like, stuff like that. So we talked about a lot of different causes here. So what about menopausal bodies and like specifically and epigenetics? So now for the sake of this episode, it's important to note that we are talking about genetic or epigenetic conditions that are not life-altering to a large extent. We aren't referring to conditions that need immediate medical intervention or experience like Down syndrome or cystic fibrosis or even things like cancer. This is not what we are referring to when we talk about genetics or epigenetics on this podcast. We are referencing the disorders involved in the way that your body goes through menopause differently that we see very often, like some autoimmune conditions, thyroid issues, and even insulin resistance. So epigenetics play a crucial role in how we experience the menopausal transition and journey. So remember, in a vacuum, in normal menopause transition should be estrogen and progesterone start to steadily go down as the ovaries start to atrophy, and the body begins to produce a different form of estrogen, E1, from our fat cells and other organs, and progesterone production shifts primarily to the adrenal glands. So that's where progesterone is being produced, is in your adrenals now. Testosterone should relatively stay the same, as it is mainly produced by the adrenals as well, and maybe a slight increase to help compensate for those changes in estrogen and progesterone. While estrogen decreases, there is going to be a shift in fat storage seen, but over time it should be very gradual, does not translate to metabolic changes over time, aka there shouldn't be any fat gain, and symptoms of menopause should be gradual and actually not extreme in a vacuum. Okay, so this is where I can get real ranty here, and I'm going to try not to, otherwise we're going to be here forever. But in a vacuum, so in these perfectly controlled studies where people live in a lab and they can control everything, in a vacuum, if your body did not experience anything else and you're just doing these things, right? But let's face it, we don't live in a vacuum, not even close. And our behaviors and environment over time will be the thing that actually determines what happens during your menopause transition. because most of us live a life that involves at least one or more factors that cause some epigenetic changes in some way, shape, or form, like chronic stress, chronic dieting, improper nutritional intake, chronic physiological, psychological stress. Maybe there's alcohol involved, smoking, chronically poor sleep. The menopause transition is not smooth for like 99% of people. This is what kills me when I see people post and they're like, my menopause transition was great. I didn't experience any changes. I look more fit now than before. And it's like, cool. You are very blessed in that you probably didn't have a ton of environmental changes. You probably weren't yo-yo dieting a ton. You were focusing on building muscle mass from an early age. That is not the story for most women. So that's not to say that story is wrong. That is awesome. You are so lucky. You made some really great choices. Maybe you were educated on this stuff. You were very into health and fitness and you were putting on the muscle mass, which is very protective of this, right? So you knew the importance of sleep. Maybe you didn't have a ton of financial stressors growing up. Like you were in a better position. But unfortunately, there are many, 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 many women who that is not their story, where it's just felt like an uphill battle since they can ever remember. So obviously that transition is going to be different. So for example, chronic psychological stress and undereating, which is just another form of stress on your body as well, can cause the body to overproduce cortisol and underproduce or basically ignore progesterone. This will cause epigenetic changes in our body's hormone profile and create a harsh and sudden menopause transition where symptoms are extreme and seem to happen almost overnight and come out of absolutely nowhere. And they are difficult to remedy even when we try to work harder, right? So there's hormonal miscommunication, and that can lead to other hormonal crashes like a sudden estrogen swing or a loss of enough testosterone. Over time, if epigenetic changes are not remedied, some of us, especially those with hereditary predispositions, you have those manuals, they may start to develop conditions that are harder to reverse, like hypothyroidism and autoimmune conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, for example.
Yeah. So basically what's happening is all of the stress over time is going to start changing the way that your body communicates with its own organs and its own hormone production, right? And so it can switch to, oh, we have this instruction manual like in the cellar, in the dusty cellar over here. Oh no, like let's use this one because this one's going to maybe help protect us a little bit more. So let's change that communication pathway or alter it, right? So we see this in clients a lot where suddenly their body seems to shut down on them during the menopausal transition, where they start gaining weight without changing anything they're doing, or they suddenly feel terrible. So joint pain, hot flashes, fatigue, etc. And like their body has suddenly stopped responding. This can also sometimes come with the development of autoimmune diseases. So while this type of menopausal transition might be common and normalized in society, it isn't actually normal. And it is caused by outside stress factors changing the ways our genes are expressed. So here's the moral of the story with that is while we may not feel like we do have a lot more control over our health than we think. And our behaviors, our choices, our environment are actually dictating how the body is functioning. Sometimes we cannot help what happens to us or what we are exposed to that can influence our internal genetic roadmap, like the death of a loved one, a car accident, which is very, very physical in terms of stress and trauma. A common trend that we see a lot is that when that virus hit in 2020, 2021, and, the whole world kind of shut down and things got really stressful and uncertain, not only in people's lives, people lost their jobs, maybe their spouse lost their job. They had to be like shut in and quarantined and all of these things. The world got really uncertain as well, which creates another layer of stress. People had to stop their regular habits. So they couldn't go to the gym. They couldn't exercise. They couldn't do all of the things that made them more healthy or maybe like helped them create this epigenetic profile that was going to give them a better menopause transition. And a lot of bodies started changing. And we see this trend a lot where a lot of people come into even consultation calls and they're like, after this 2020-2021 period, my hormonal balance like suddenly shifted. And they saw a sudden onset of digestive issues, early menopause, a harsh transition all of a sudden into menopause. Rapid weight gain was a huge and very common trend after this situation. And this is from epigenetic changes based on the environment that we were suddenly thrust into. And a lot of these changes are now really, really hard for clients to reverse on their own because their old methods just aren't working anymore and their bodies are completely out of control. And this is because some of these changes are now epigenetic, and it's really, really hard to change the changes that have now been made from all of this stress on such a deep level, because it's not just like surface level changes anymore.
Yeah, and like, let's give the example of like a fish in a dirty fish tank. The fish starts showing signs of sickness. It's not thriving anymore. It just doesn't look great. So what do? The most reasonable and straightforward thing to do is to clean the tank, right? Not to medicate the fish, not to tell the fish to try harder, that you're lazy. It's not going to tell you that that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. When you see like sick dogs and stuff where they rescue them, like the answer wasn't try harder, do better, take this medication. It was, let's take you out of this environment and put you into a better environment, a loving home that takes care of you and feeds you and there's less stress, right? So imagine medicating a sick fish or a dog that's like doing horrific, right? But you leave it in that toxic environment. Even if the medication helps for a short time, that fish and that dog is going to deteriorate over time because the environment is still incredibly harmful. So either way, for a lasting change, you still have to clean the freaking tank. Like, you can't not, or take the fish out of the tank and put it into a clean one. Like, this is where we see things go wrong, especially like, I mean, you guys know I've been like pretty upset about a lot of the posts and comments that I've been seeing of like, you're just drinking too much, or you're not eating enough, or you're eating too much and you're not exercising enough and you're not eating enough whole foods. And it's like, did you ask about everything else? Did you ask about everything else? Because I can guarantee you didn't, because to me, that's a very surface level kind of cop out way. And I don't like that because it's not helpful information. Like, I mean, I can guarantee you that if I just sat here and said, you're not trying hard enough, you're still drinking too much, and you need to exercise more, and you need to eat less food, and if you're not seeing changes, it's because you're lying and you're tracking or you're not trying hard enough, that's not helpful. You wouldn't listen to this anymore. You'd be pretty pissed off, right? You're like, she doesn't get it. You need to take account into everything. And this is like, my biggest thing is like, yes, for some people, maybe it is they're just overeating. There is people out there like that. But the women that I talk to on an everyday basis, that is not the case, because they send me all their information. That is not the case. So again, while it might, this is why we see so much success with the clients that we have, is because we're teaching them how to support their body and their metabolisms, controlling the environment. And even if like you're in a stressful environment, we're giving you tools to help lower that stress response, to help buffer that stress, since those hormones aren't there to do it for you anymore. And while, yes, it can seem absolutely easier to just take a little medication or supplement, right, to help your body function better, over time, that's not going to be successful. Do you think just pumping like a fish full of vitamin D is eventually going to help it get better if the tank is super dirty? Like, no, that's not realistic. So, and then you also become reliant on that one thing as that's the solution. This one thing, this one pill, this is what I was missing, right? Where it's not. You need to just, and then you're just like, if that's what you believe, then you're going to be like, okay, I just need to take more. I need to up my dose. And you become very reliant on that thing. And then you just end up like covering up some side effects. So birth control, for example, people are on birth control because they've had very poor periods, right? Like they're painful or things like that. And then eventually it comes to a time for them to come off birth control. And it's just like, holy crap, like your body just doesn't function anymore. And you're like, oh, the birth control fixed it. And it's like, no, the birth control was masking the symptoms that you were experiencing. So you didn't address the underlying cause of what the issue was. So this is kind of the exact same thing. So in this like functional nutrition practice space that we're in, the first thing that you need to learn is to diet the environment, not just the client. So it's not just you need to eat more differently. It's, okay, let's take account as to what everything looks like, your entire history, your environment, your stress. What can we do? And some of that stuff is going to be nutrition. It's going to be like, okay, you're in too much of a stress state. We need to get you eating more. But it's helping you figure out what are some other practices to really help improve the overall stress response that we're addressing these epigenetics. Because you can imagine, like with that fish in the tank, it's like, okay, we need to start cleaning the tank slowly, but we need to make sure you're getting enough nutrition as well and that your body can absorb that nutrition. So it's an encompassing thing, because you can't just quote unquote fix the fish. Like everything matters. You got to take all that into account. So this is where my whole rant of like, when people just say you're not trying hard enough or cortisol doesn't matter, it's like, maybe for you, maybe the clients you've seen, but what about everybody else? Because I don't think the hundreds of thousands of women that we've talked to and in this time point now are all liars, because that's insane.
Yeah, like how many situations do we see every single day, Steph, of these women coming in with like not the same issues or the same story, but very, very similar stories. Their bodies have shut down on them. Like there's a lot of things that the environment or what they're doing right now and their behaviors are like, there has to be a reason and there has to be an answer as to why their quality of life is suddenly so low when they go into this menopausal transition, right? Now, there are some genetic or epigenetic changes that can affect the way your body functions through menopause. And it can even affect the way that you store or lose fat potentially along the journey. And of course, how you feel in terms of internal health, right? So let's dive into some main ones that we have seen and what we can do about them. The first one is actually going to be something called methylation. And so people can have issues with their methylation. And there is a very common genetic mutation that we see in women, and it is a mutated form of something called the MTHFR gene. And you may have heard of it before. If you have a mutation and you know it, you obviously have heard of it before. And this can affect the way that the body actually methylates. Now, what is methylation? It is a metabolic process that switches genes on and off and repairs DNA. It also affects nutrient conversions, and this means that methylation plays a very important role in how our genes are expressed and how our body actually responds to the environment. So roles that methylation have include assisting our immune responses, so how we get sick or, how we fight off viruses, our cardiovascular health and our risk for cardiovascular disease as we get older, hormone and neurotransmitter production. So that means our neurological health and our hormone health is very dependent on methylation, and much more, because methylation is part of almost every chemical process in the body. And this process does rely on nutrients and enzymes, especially folate, B vitamins. And if you can't properly absorb these nutrients because you have some kind of MTHFR mutation or methylation issue, then of course that function in your body suffers, which means that neurotransmitter production, hormone health, cardiovascular health, immune responses, that all suffers as well. So the MTHFR gene mutation is actually very common nowadays, unfortunately, and it will change the way that you metabolize and convert nutrients from your diet into vitamins, minerals, and proteins that your body can actually use. So it can affect those hormonal and neurotransmitter levels, brain function, it affects digestion, it can actually affect your cholesterol levels, and even more. So if you do have an MTHFR mutation, if you can have one or two, you are at a much higher risk for autoimmune diseases development like lupus, Hashimoto's. We see this all the time, RA even. This will affect your metabolism and your immune health and overall health and vitality for the rest of your life. So this methylation system is actually very, very important. And it's really not something that people address very much. I will admit, like the research is very new with the MTHFR gene mutations and methylation, but there's a lot coming out, especially since like 2020, 2021, that shows how important it is, especially in women, when it comes to the way that our body functions and the way that our body actually goes through menopause. Some studies, especially recently, show that these mutations in your genetic profile with methylation can also contribute to early onset menopause and a much worse menopause transition, which affects your weight gain, your energy, and your hormonal balance, which causes that vicious cycle that Steph was talking about. Now, since you get one instruction manual for this MTHFR gene from both of your parents, you can actually have one copy or two copies of these mutated instructions. Obviously, with both copies of the mutated instructions, the effects of poor methylation can be far worse. I've met a lot, like some women that have the, it's called like the homozygous mutation. So they have like both sets are the same and they're both mutated. And they do have some very negative effects on the body with the way their body functions. However, I will say that when people have a much better environment, their MTHFR symptoms are much lower. Now this can affect everyone differently, but sometimes health problems that are very common with people who have these MTHFR mutations are ADHD, autoimmune conditions and thyroid issues, cardiovascular disease, as we said, chronic fatigue, which is very common going into the menopausal transition, development of certain types of cancers like colon cancer is associated with MTHFR. Digestive issues are huge. So IBS, IBD, even the onset of ulcerative colitis, any kind of inflammation, heartburn, low stomach acid, all of those issues are causes of, or from methylation issues sometimes. Hormonal issues, including PCOS, any kind of other hormonal issue that we see. Migraines can also, like chronic migraines can be part of MTHFR, and the development of any kind of neurological disorder. So even anxiety and depression can be a cause of, from this. Some people are associating MTHFR mutations with the onset of other neurological disorders as well, that are maybe arguably more serious, like schizophrenia. So research has even found an association with this MTHFR mutation. And as I said, depression and anxiety and other mental health disorders, which a lot of women come into the program also on a lot of anti-anxiety and anti-depression medication. And this is because the MTHFR produces an essential enzyme that converts certain microminerals called folate into the form that we can use for mood regulating neurotransmitter production. So if you're not converting that specific nutrient, you're probably not feeling very good from a mental standpoint. Now, in terms of testing MTHFR, you have to do genetic testing for this. If you ever done like 23andMe or a DNA test done, you can actually go unlock your raw data because they have your whole genome and you can go put it through a different program or take it to your medical professional. Usually like a naturopath or a functional medicine doctor will know how to do it. And then you can see if you do have one or two of these mutations, which can just help with, lifestyle interventions or specific knowledge for you as to why are these things happening with my body and how can I maybe help them or fix them or support them in the best way. If you don't have a gene mutation, you don't have to have the gene mutation to have methylation issues because methylation genes are still an epigenetic influence, which means that your environment, like you don't have to have the mutation. Your environment can still change methylation rates, which we see a lot. We actually can test methylation rates of estrogen detox in a Dutch test that we provide with our coaching. A 2022 study on 181 postmenopausal women. This is very important. So they did study postmenopausal women. This was just 2 years ago. Found that those postmenopausal women who were pre-diabetic had over 100, they had 118 different methylated regions in their body when compared to postmenopausal women who had normal blood glucose. So they weren't pre-diabetic. So basically pre-diabetic postmenopausal women had over 118 epigenetic changes from like a cellular level versus the women who had fine blood glucose. So they did find that those methylated gene areas that were different in the pre-diabetic group were actually all related to the biological functions of energy metabolism, cell differentiation, which is basically how our body like reproduces things and recycles things and detoxifies things, and then also like tumor development and things like that. So these women had literal like epigenetic changes in their body when they were pre-diabetic versus the women who were healthy. And this was all post-menopause, which is really fascinating.
So the biggest thing when we're talking about this kind of stuff, you guys, is also just because you might have these things does not mean it's a death sentence, does not mean that you cannot see changes, does not mean that you cannot be successful. Don't let that become a label or a crutch as to why you aren't where you want to be. Don't use that as like I don't want to say like an excuse. I don't like that word, but don't let that become part of your identity. Just know that like, yes, you have it, but we can work around that. Like having someone work by your side that like understands this and knows that it's going to take a little bit longer. We got to address certain things. That's what's really important. Like the actual like thing itself, it's like, yes, you have it, but that's not why you can't see changes. It might be why past interventions didn't work, but it doesn't mean you can't see changes. So I want you guys to take that as like this information should be empowering. And it's like, okay, now I know a lot about the way my body functions. Now let's work with my body to be able to get to where I want to be.
Yeah, they actually did find in that study too that I didn't mention is when they did intervene with like lifestyle changes, they changed like over half of those methylated genes back to like what they should be with like women who weren't pre-diabetic. So
yeah, so it's not like a crap, I'm screwed, like this is bad. It's like, no, now we know why past like interventions didn't work for you, why the keto didn't work, the Optavia, all the things that didn't work. Now we can actually create a plan for you based on that. And then all the epigenetic stuff and all the questions that we ask you, which is a lot, to make sure that we are going to get the results that you need. But be aware that sometimes with these things, it does take longer to like, quote unquote, heal, right? And get to a place where your body will respond. But no, it is possible. It's just not going to be a 30 pounds in 30 days or 30 pounds in 2 months or even 3 months. Like we need to do the healing aspect first so you can see changes. Otherwise you won't, and you'll just continue doing what you're doing and be miserable. So the next one is hormonal imbalances. This one's a little bit tougher because it's ignorant for us to tell you that epigenetic expressions aren't a cause of hormonal imbalances. And if you've struggled with hormonal issues your entire menstrual life, then there's probably some sort of genetic merit to that. If you haven't really had issues up until perimenopause or after kids, chances are it's far more epigenetic than we think. That being said, some hormonal issues can be predisposed, such as hereditary potential for like PCOS, so an androgen dominant hormonal issue. This means that a body being genetically predisposed to producing more androgens than usual will have a much higher chance of developing a disorder from a younger age. We have also seen varying degrees or PCOS rates in varying different races as well, showing us that there must be a little bit of genetic predisposition to that as well, right? That being said, PCOS has been shown to be well mitigated or treated with lifestyle interventions like exercise, healthy nutrition intake, de-stressing, making it a condition that can be dealt with pretty well if you can change your lifestyle. I did a podcast episode on testosterone and I did one on PCOS as well already. So if you haven't listened to those, go back because you'll learn about the specifics to help improve those conditions as well. Another hormonal imbalance due to epigenetic changes that we see is early menopause. So several studies have demonstrated now that there are genes that can get turned on due to the environment stressors that will trigger early onset of menopause. This is where, you have like genetics load the gun, stress pulls the trigger. So those who go through menopause early are at a higher risk of developing diseases in older age. So some clients come into our coaching program that think they're in early onset menopause when they realize after a few months of intervention that they actually weren't. And once we can get those hormonal balances under control or working properly again, usually we will see their cycle come back or their menopausal transition that was actually a hormonal miscommunication in the brain due to stressors, and it just slows down or ends up going the other way. So we've had women that like literally never ovulated before, and then they message us like, whoa, things feel weird. And then we're like, this is ovulation. She's like, what the heck? Like this has never happened. Or we've had women that like didn't have periods for a few years. And we've had a handful of women who've had their cycle come back. That being said, like I'm working with someone right now who's had pretty terrible cycles for her entire life and went off birth control 4 years ago. And it's been horrible ever since. And she just had her first period that we like, she had one when we started and now we're on our second one. And there's been like no pain, incredibly minimal bloating. She had cramping maybe one day, like it completely changed. And the wild thing is that we're in a fat loss phase, which is inherently a stress phase. But like we have done so much work leading up to this. And even before she started doing some things that I had recommended before working with me that have made huge changes. So it is possible. A lot of the time we think it's like, I have this one thing, and therefore this is why this, right? Like we almost let that diagnosis or that name of whatever it is be the reason, like we almost hold ourselves back or sabotage ourselves or use it as a crutch when we can actually see changes Can it be challenging? Yes. Is it worth it? I would tell you all the women that we've worked with would say yes.
And also on that note, autoimmune conditions are a very large epigenetic problem, especially for women. So genetically, women are far more likely to develop an autoimmune condition than men in their lifetimes, like far more likely. Like the statistics are like insanely skewed towards women. Now, remember, autoimmune conditions are where your body in some capacity sees another part of your body as a threat, and your immune system starts attacking some other part of your body. So you start attacking yourself instead of maybe these outside pathogens that it should be cleaning up or eliminating. Examples of this would be Hashimoto's, where their immune system attacks your thyroid, or rheumatoid arthritis, where your immune system suddenly starts to attack connective lining and fluid of your joints, right? So autoimmune conditions are considered pretty permanent most of the time. They are pretty hard to reverse for a lot of people. However, they are considered still manageable with proper lifestyle and mindset work, and de-stressing is a really big one because psychological stress is actually a very main cause of autoimmune conditions that we're finding. The reason that women develop more autoimmune issues than men is actually because of our, again, genetics. We, as women, we have two X chromosomes that determines that we are females, versus males have an X and a Y. So they only have one X chromosome. And because we have two X chromosomes as females instead of one, this is where we have discovered that a lot of our immunological cells are, which means that our immune system is directly tied to what our X chromosomes end up expressing. Double the X chromosomes, and now you've doubled your chances of these genes either being mutated, being turned off or on in response to stressors, so epigenetic expression. The chances are now much higher. However, women don't often experience autoimmune outbreaks or any kind of flare-up until a stressful or traumatic event or years of chronic stress trigger it. So think about it. A lot of people who get diagnosed with autoimmune conditions develop it when they're adults. They don't usually get it when they're like children, right? So it comes over time, usually due to the onset or the buildup of like stressors or something that's happening in our environment to cause that epigenetic change for things to get turned on. So again, like Steph said, while your genetics may load the gun, it's actually your behaviors and your environment or the way that your body responds to your quote unquote dirty fish tank that ultimately pulls the trigger.
So now here's the disclaimer. Having an MTHFR mutation or another genetic disorder or autoimmune condition doesn't automatically mean that you will experience the symptoms or the health issues that we talked about before. The way this gene is expressed can be largely determined by the choices that you make. So the MTHFR mutation symptoms are also depend on which variant of the mutation you have and whether the variations affect both of your MTHFR genes. If you have the MTHFR mutation, autoimmune condition, or a hormonal imbalance, or suspect that you might, this is not an excuse to just blame your genetics on the fact that you don't feel optimal. Even gene mutations can be largely turned off or on by our external influences. So having something not working properly is an opportunity to make changes to your diet, your lifestyle, maximize your methylation, manage symptoms, optimize your overall health. And those changes may be different than you actually think. It's not just eat less, move more. So yes, you might have these things. Yes, you might feel like crap right now, but this should be empowering to you, like I said, to understand what is happening. And now, like, once we know the issue, we can address it. Okay. And it's not just going to happen from like taking a medication, right? Because we get lots of people who are like, man, I started taking thyroid meds and I didn't lose weight. Yeah, that's not the job of the thyroid medication. It doesn't impact your metabolism that way. It helps your symptoms. So we need to actually like, yes, now we know what's going on in your body. Yes, it sucks that you've had to go through this experience. Yes, it sucks that you probably haven't had help for a lot of years, but now we can take action in the appropriate way to help you get to where you want to be.
All right, so there are things we can do to help, as Steph said, and we want to help the body feel more safe in different ways because a lot of the times the expressions of these epigenetic changes are the result of your body feeling unsafe in some way, right? So we want to reduce symptoms. We want to change our epigenetic changes and maybe try to reverse them a little bit. So Steph, what can we actually start doing to help with these epigenetic changes?
Okay, so these are probably like honestly pretty close to being in order of the way we would want to address them with most people. So number one, first and foremost, is eating the right amount consistently. So this means eating a consistent amount of not only the calories that your body needs, but also nutrients like protein. Okay, so getting in the right amount of carbohydrates and fats and protein with a consistent calorie intake amount over a long period of time. So this isn't just like, oh, 3 weeks and I'm good to go. It has been shown to induce the most positive and long-lasting changes in epigenetic adaptation. Seriously, do not take this for granted. This is like the most important thing, is eating enough calories consistently. So this is where we want to stay in like a smaller calorie range. Like I would say 150, 200-ish max. We don't want to have huge, crazy fluctuations because that's a stress on our body. We want to make sure that we're getting enough carbohydrate to help give you enough energy, enough protein to stabilize your blood sugars and maintain muscle mass. All of these things matter so much more than you think. Because let's face it, if eat less, move more was going to help you feel better and look better, it would have worked by now. And it's not. So number one, eat the right amount of calories consistently. If you need to figure out what that is, book a consultation call with us. We do this for free all the time. It's in the show notes for you. Secondly, we want to make sure that we are consuming more micronutrients for your body. Okay, so these are things like vitamin B and magnesium in food. So for example, with the MTHFR mutations, consuming more folate in your diet may actually help with that methylation. Some of the best whole food sources of folate include dark leafy greens, avocados, lentils. We want to make sure that we're getting all the micronutrients that you need. And sometimes supplementation is necessary. So example, like B vitamins are notoriously very hard to absorb in our body. Most women are going to be deficient in B vitamins, especially if you've been on birth control, because it completely depletes us of it. So supplementing with the vitamin B complex is fantastic. It's super affordable. You can get it anywhere. That is one that we recommend for all women. The next one, of course, is manage your stress with lifestyle and mindset changes. This is something we all gloss over because we don't think it's that important, and it doesn't matter because it has to be nutrition and exercise, right? But it is so incredibly important for true change. You have no idea, especially those who have an autoimmune condition or have the MTHFR genetic variations are going to be more likely to have an imbalance of your neurotransmitter levels, which can affect your mood, your irritability, especially when you're stressed, which leads to a lower stress threshold. And remember, our threshold for handling stress is already going to come down when we're going through perimenopause and onwards, so we don't want to make that worse. This is why before you could handle a 9 out of 10, and now you can only handle a 5 out of 10 before things really start to go sideways on you. Okay, so some tips to really help handle stress is going to include things like regular box breathing. Maybe it's meditation practice. Getting your feet up is huge. Journaling. Spending time in nature, uncovering the specific activities that help you unwind, that fill up your cup, that help you stay grounded, and decompress are going to be the most important tools to help manage personal stress levels on a daily basis. So we do not consider high-intensity exercise a form of stress relief. It's not going to be part of your de-stressing practice with this because it'll increase your stress response. That's what exercise does. So finding other ways to fill up your cup that bring you joy, that make you feel good. Maybe it's just like having a cup of coffee and you're under a nice blanket and you're doing an adult coloring book. That was like my mom's favorite thing to do. Maybe it's knitting, maybe it's crocheting, maybe it's reading a book, maybe it's journal. There's so many things that you could be doing to help fill up your cup and de-stress that you feel good after. That's what you want to be doing.
All right. So, proper sleep is also going to be one that we want to make sure we're getting done. Supporting natural detoxification is also something that we don't really talk about a lot. Now, this doesn't mean do a detox. Sorry. Our organs are responsible for detoxing. However, when we have mutations or, we have poor methylation and we make choices or have stressors that prevent the efficiency of this process, we actually can experience a buildup of unwanted metabolites and a potential chain reaction of even more stress or even more hormonal imbalances or a buildup of certain compounds that we actually should be detoxifying, which we don't want. If you have reduced methylation pathways, methylation contributes to poor detoxification in the body, and it's important to support your body's natural elimination pathways. And I describe this when I go through like Dutch assessments and stuff, because we can see that sometimes cortisol metabolization or detoxification becomes a problem, and then cortisol builds up, which causes a negative stress response, when really it's just the detoxification that we need to figure out. But you almost want to think of it like a bathtub, and you want it when you take a bath, you want warm water in your bathtub. And so you want kind of warm water coming into the bathtub from the faucet, but you also want to be draining all that cold water at the bottom in order to maintain a nice warm bath. And if your drain is not working, then you're probably going to have, first of all, your bathtub's going to overflow. But you're probably not going to have nice, warm, comfortable water to take your bath in because that cold water is not draining anymore. And that's a really important process in the body when it comes to hormones or other metabolites. Is we need to be getting rid of the stuff that we've already utilized because we don't want it to build up as a negative or toxic compound in the body, right? So things that we can do to support natural detoxification include eating high fiber diet. So 20 to 50 grams per day. It's going to depend on the person. You need to find out what's going to be good for you in terms of the amount of fiber. Ensure you have both soluble and insoluble fiber in your meals. Eat more anti-inflammatory foods, such as lots of vegetables with lots of phytochemicals, well-sourced protein perhaps, healthy fats within caloric reason. So make sure that, as Steph said, you're making sure you're eating consistently and eating the right amount. Fruits can also be very anti-inflammatory as well. Move and sweat regularly. So at least 4 to 5 times per week. Make sure you're not doing any kind of high intensity stuff, but you do want to be moving, because when you're moving, going for walks, doing your weight training, you can do the sauna if you want, an Epsom salt bath. That can help to pull stuff out because your skin is an organ and it can help to detoxify, right? Keep your bowels moving, so stay well hydrated and make sure that you're pooping regularly. This is a way that you can take advantage of your primary detoxification mechanisms with your kidneys and your colon. So urination and defecation are some of the best ways that we can get rid of a lot of stuff. Take advantage of antioxidants, phytonutrients that support detoxification, which is just all generally found in whole foods. Avoid exposure to toxins, so strong chemical house cleaners, maybe avoid them. Probably avoid plastics containing BPAs or chemicals sprayed outside, right? So if your town is spraying specific bug deterrents, they'll usually put signs up in like the green areas that they do spray herbicides and stuff, so you stay away from them. But just make sure that you stay away from them, because these things can actually inhibit methylation and act as endocrine disruptors. Another one would be, as I said, with the detoxification, is making sure you're weight training, because muscle is crucial as we age for not only bone density and strength, but for healthy metabolism and fat loss and hormonal balance. Muscle is not only calorically expensive, meaning if we don't use it, we lose it, but if we work to keep it, it keeps us metabolically more active. So we actually burn more calories at rest with more muscle. Not only that, but muscle can actually communicate with hormone centers and our brain, helping reduce symptoms of some disorders, as well as even minimizing negative effects of a diagnosed condition. So the muscles can actually communicate things and have almost like a reverse cycle going on once we use them and we have healthy muscle. So getting in movement and exercise throughout the day is also crucial. So as Steph said, a note on high intensity workouts, while they have health benefits for many people, if you do have a body that is highly stressed and already feeling unsafe and your body's not working properly, high intensity workouts are not going to be the solution, and they're probably going to cause more stress than the body can recover from.
The next one is going to be minimizing alcohol intake and don't smoke. So alcohol intake and smoking can make symptoms way worse by inhibiting DNA methylation and increasing the demands of detoxification on the liver. Limiting your consumption of alcohol can support less interference in already stunted methylation processes in those who have the MTHFR genetic mutations. If you do decide to drink alcohol, it should be consumed in moderation, up to 1 drink per day for women and 2 drinks for men, and preferably in the forms of tequila, vodka, mezcal, rather than wine and beer. There are some biohacks that you can do to cut back on your alcohol intake. So what I used to do is because I don't enjoy drinking alcohol very much, honestly. Like if I'm having alcoholic beverage, I don't want to taste the alcohol. Like that's how I am. So I actually used to like bring like a mug or whatever and just have like, just tell people I was having like a mixed drink, but really it was nothing in there. Or I would do like soda with like soda water with like lime and say I was having a vodka soda and there was no vodka in that. And eventually ended up telling people that I just don't really drink anymore. And that was really handy and helpful. And they understood it when I talked about like wanting to get my hormones better and I was trying to work on my health and that kind of stuff. But it's like, it's insane to me when you're like, oh, I'm trying to drink less or I'm trying to quit smoking for my health. And people are like, oh my gosh, that's insane. Whereas like, you could be like, oh, I'm cutting carbs or cutting out this entire food group. And people are like so much more accepting of that, which is wild. So again, don't smoke. Try and reduce your alcohol intake where you can. Studies have demonstrated epigenetic improvements and recovery from the damage done by smoking and alcohol when people quit. So just because you've done the things doesn't mean you can't get into a better position by quitting. It's not like, oh, it's too late. Because I mean, alcohol is one of the biggest things that we know contributes to cancer. We know it contributes to hormonal imbalances. It affects your sleep, your ability to lose weight, affects your liver, your cognition. Like it also decreases like your happy hormones at rest. So you're typically going to feel more depressed when you're not drinking. And this can be as little as 1 to 2 drinks a week, even in women that some studies have been showing. So this is just something to be really aware of. If you're going to quote unquote quit anything, I'd rather be quitting smoking and alcohol over quitting carbs. I don't know why this is like, I just don't understand. Like when you compare the two, it's just bizarre to me that people are like, no, I'm gonna quit the carbs and keep my alcohol. Like it doesn't make sense scientifically or in any other way, shape, or form.
All right, so the next one is going to be second last, heal your underlying digestive issues. So heal and support your gut. It is critical to improving your body functioning, methylation, bringing your body back to optimal overall health. We do address this a lot in our coaching. We actually have a lot of comprehensive intake assessments. And the one that we do, we actually have 2 really, really in-depth and comprehensive gut health assessments and digestive health in assessments, just because digestive inflammation can cause nutrient malabsorption, extra systematic inflammation, which can further block proper chemical reactions in the body. It can make you feel worse or just make it harder for your body to work optimally. So a lot of the times, this is a really big chink in our chain that we can actually help you fix. That's going to just help with overall epigenetic expression and the way your body is functioning. So you have a gut health episode. Is it with Coach Hannah?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Well,
So
maybe actually, I may have done a solo gut health
okay.
one.
Yeah, we
But
do.
There might be 2. I don't know.
We do have some podcast episodes about that, so we won't get into it, but just make sure that you're working on your gut health and make sure that de-stressing is part of that because that actually can help our digestion as well.
Okay, so the next one is check your supplements. Remember, this is the very last thing that you ever want to look at. Supplements are supplemental and will absolutely 100% be a waste of money if you don't clean out your fish tank first. However, people with some autoimmune conditions or MTHFR mutations might have more difficulty converting B6, B12, or folic acid into its usable form, and this can cause some negative symptoms to actually get worse. So standard supplements that can help menopausal women would be taking omega-3s, a vitamin B complex, and magnesium. If you have the MTHFR, then it's important to opt for supplements that contain a methylated form of B vitamins. So remember, not only does our environment play a role, but the behaviors we are raised with create core values in the way that we live as adults, which is why some behaviors, thought patterns, and habits seem really, really hard to change. I was talking to a woman yesterday who was like, yeah, you explain the things, I do the things, I feel really good. And then 2 weeks, I like panic and start doubting myself. And I'm like, yeah, it's because you have all these biases of like all the past diets that you've done and what you've heard everywhere else. And it's really hard to want to switch because you have all these past things that are telling you that this is wrong, right? Like eating more food or having your carbohydrates. Because when you look for something, let's say I want to find all the reasons why I think carbs would be bad for me, your body will just, like your brain will just pump out all the examples from your past as to why that is in fact true. right? So, but it'll do the same thing for the other way. But if it just depends what you have more experience in, right? But we know that if that was the case, you would not be where you are today. So, we have like a one common question that really pops up, which is my autoimmune condition is hereditary. My mother had it, my grandmother had it, but hereditary does not mean guaranteed. When you have something that runs in your family that is considered an epigenetic change on the body, yes, you're at a higher risk for developing that condition than someone who didn't have those genetic predispositions, but it's in your behavior and environment that ultimately turn those genes on or off. Okay, so in our coaching, this is what we do. We go through all the different assessments with you, which we have quite a few. It doesn't mean that your plan is going to be complicated, because people hear assessments and they're like, oh my gosh, it's going to be so hard to follow. There's going to be so many rules. There's going to be things I can't have. No, this helps us create a plan of, okay, based on all this, it's going to take us likely X amount to heal. These are the things that we really want to see improve before we can go into a fat loss phase, because otherwise your body's not going to respond. It's not these complicated protocols of eat at this time and at this time, and you can't have this, but you have to have this, and you have to take this supplement. It's not like that. So just because the body is complicated, the assessments might seem like, why do we need all this information? It helps us really create the roadmap for you based on everything that you've been through, all the epigenetic changes that you've had, the behaviors, the stress, your past dieting history, all of those things, because all those things have brought you to the position that you're at right now. And then we can make a plan to address the root causes, fix the environment, make you more resilient to stress by improving your hormones, by improving your gut health, your energy, your sleep, all of those things, so that you can see success. Because we all know that hopping on the next low fat, like the new diet that's low calorie, low carb, the Optavia, the whatever you're going to take, right? It's going to be a short-term thing, and it's likely going to push your epigenetics in the wrong direction. So if you need help figuring out what the heck this looks like, regardless if you want to coach with us or not, we help you figure out roughly where you should be. We don't do the assessments with our consultations. Obviously, it's just for coaching, but we will go through a lot of questions with you to help you figure out where things are, the likely timeline that it will take you to get to where you want to be, those kinds of things, but give you a plan to follow and what that looks like, provide you with some structure, what you're missing, and explain to you why that's necessary for you. And then the rest is like, awesome. If you want to work with us, sweet. If you don't, awesome. I don't care. I just want you to really learn about your body, what you need, and be able to set you up for success. Because let's face it, it's not just eat less, move more. You're not lazy. It's not all these things that people keep pointing blame at. It is more complicated than that. That doesn't mean the solution has to be super complicated. So I hope that makes sense for you guys all. Kirianna, is there anything you want to wrap up with at all here?
No, thank you for having me. I'm sorry, you guys, all of our very in-depth podcasts together with Steph and I always make it really long and scientific, but I hope you bared with us, and I hope you guys felt that you got some learning opportunity out of what we talked about.
Perfect. Awesome. If you need anything, you know where to find us. Head to the show notes for a consultation, to access our Facebook group. Whatever you need, feel free to message me. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.